Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Connie Kim. President Trump said he's open to meeting with Chairman Kim Jong-un again if he finds a summit will be helpful. North Korea, however, continues to reject this idea, saying that another summit will only be helpful for Washington and not Pyongyang. Meanwhile, a South Korean court has ruled for the first time that North Korean leader Kim Jong-un must compensate the two former prisoners of war for its forced labor for decades. Today, we discuss the implications of this ruling and the prospects for another U.S.-North Korea summit. Scott Snyder joins us today. He's a senior fellow for Korea Studies and director of the program on U.S. Korea policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. His book, South Korea at the Crossroads, examines the trajectory of South Korean foreign policy and offers predictions. Joining us today is Joshua Stanton. Mr. Stanton is an attorney in Washington, D.C. with expertise in criminal and civil litigation and administrative law. Mr. Stanton had assisted Congress draft numerous North Korea sanctions bills and laws. His blog, One Free Korea, focuses on North Korea sanctions and human rights issues. Mr. Stanton's views today are solely his own. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Connie.
Thank you.
Let's start with North Korean leader's sister Kim Yo-jong's statement. So she said that another summit this year is probably unlikely, and this came as President Trump said he's open to meeting with Chairman Kim Jong-un again if he finds a summit to be helpful. So when the president says helpful, what does he mean by this?
Well, I think that probably what he is doing is simply making that statement as a kind of placeholder, and really it's about the question of whether or not President Trump might find that kind of meeting useful as part of his own election strategy at this point.
Mm-hmm. So, Mr. Stanton, do you think that he will use this summit in order to garner a win for the presidential elections?
Look, I don't get into the business of predicting what Donald Trump will do. I think that there has now been a lot of criticism about the failure of past summits to achieve significant results for U.S. national interests. And Donald Trump has to be weighing that right now when he decides whether another summit would be anything more than a photo op.
Mm-hmm. And if we look at Kim Yo-jong's statement, she says that another summit does no good for North Korea and that it would need critical, irreversible measures from the U.S. in order for them to denuclearize. So what does North Korea mean when they say critical, irreversible measures from the U.S.?
Well, Kim Yo-jong also seems to focus on the formulation that the North Koreans have used a lot of objecting to the U.S. hostile policy. And really what that does is it attempts to put the ball for action in the U.S. court, but it does it in a way that is quite ambiguous in terms of what hostile policy means, and it essentially allows North Korea to reserve judgment about what constitutes a set of actions that would actually live up to the definition of removal of the hostile policy.
I want to jump in and agree with Scott that hostile policy is a vague, ambiguous, meandering term that means everything from the presence of U.S. forces in South Korea to U.S. criticism of North Korea's crimes against humanity to the very existence of sanctions. And what you see a lot in Kim Yo-jong's latest statement is a great deal of focus on the sanctions, which contradicts the predictions of those who said that sanctions could not get inside Kim Jong-un's head. They have.
Mm-hmm. If Kim Jong-un overrules that statement and does come out to another summit and asks for sanctions relief, is that possible in the current sanctions regime?
It is possible if we focus sanctions relief where it really belongs, which is North Korea's poor and hungry. The sanctions do not prevent the delivery of food to North Korea. The state itself, however, has done nothing to deserve a financial bailout. If we were to give sanctions relief to Pyongyang itself, all we would be doing is removing the pressure that is necessary to get Kim Jong-un back to the bargaining table to bargain in good faith.
Well, I agree with what Josh is saying, but I also believe that a revamp of the regime in some respects may be in order because the North Koreans have taken a number of sanctions evasion steps. We know that the existing UNSC resolutions are not being enforced adequately in a number of areas. This is really about China. And so I think that there is an argument to be made for reviewing what we've done so far and possibly readjusting the sanctions regime in order to ensure that it is more effective in driving or increasing the pressure on North Korea necessary to move us in a positive direction.
And I want to touch upon Representative Begin's trip to South Korea. There was a lot of media speculation about how Representative Begin will be meeting with North Korean counterparts, but he made that clear in Seoul, saying that his purpose of the trip was to meet with his South Korean ally. And he also criticized Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee for being locked in an old way of thinking. So what kind of message was Representative Begin giving to North Korea?
Well, I think partly what he was saying is that we're not chasing North Korea right now. And also, Deputy Secretary Begin had very good reason to go to Seoul right now, as South Korea has just appointed a new national security team, and there should be a priority on developing the relationships necessary to continue effective coordination on North Korea policy, especially given the fact that the South Korean team that has been put into place is very North Korea focused.
Mm-hmm. So we've heard Secretary Pompeo and Representative Begin emphasize a resumption of the U.S.-North Korea dialogue. So do you expect some kind of progress in the talks, or do you expect to see the summit happen this year?
Yeah, I believe that the North Koreans have been in a default mode focusing on spring of 2021 and a new administration since the beginning of the year. And you can't rule out the possibility of a summit, but I think that we can virtually rule out the possibility that any summit this year will be productive.
I agree completely. Look, the North Koreans are clearly running out Donald Trump's clock. They can read a poll as well as we can. If the North Koreans, you can always get Kim Jong-un to show up for sanctions relief that denies us the very leverage we need to disarm him and to get real concessions. But if your goal is to get a photo op in an election year, look, we can always get Kim Jong-un to show up for that and leave this crisis to the next president.
And I want to now focus our attention to a South Korean court's ruling where it ordered Chairman Kim Jong-un to compensate the two former prisoners of war who were enforced to labor and detained in North Korea for decades. So this was the first ruling of its case for a South Korean court to make this ruling, and it has claimed jurisdiction over North Korea and issued a compensation order for Chairman Kim Jong-un for the first time. So could you tell us the significance of this?
So I will first warn the viewers that I'm not a South Korean lawyer. I had some proliferal experience with the South Korean legal system when I defended clients who were either pending trial or had been tried in that system. But I would not overinterpret the significance of this decision. In the South Korean legal system, precedent really means much less than it would in the American common law system.
We heard that additional families of the abductees of the Korean War are planning to file a lawsuit against North Korea based on this verdict from the South Korean court. So are you saying that this won't have much of an impact for future rulings?
And I encourage them to push those forward because they do deserve to be compensated, even though we have to understand that these verdicts that the first two plaintiffs received were for $17,000 and some change. That seems woefully inadequate. But you should not be surprised to see future courts decide similar cases very differently. It is a very different legal system in Korea. The other thing you should watch for is the extent to which the Moon administration may put pressure on the judiciary, either to prevent the collection of funds or to sway the next decision.
Mr. Snyder, how did you see this ruling?
Well, just 2 points. One is this has been a long time coming. In a way, what is really striking that is made apparent by the ruling is the absence of prior rulings on this issue. But I also want to agree with Josh very much that this puts the executive-judiciary relationship directly in the spotlight. And this is really complicated, I think, for the Moon administration because they've been pushing for reform of that relationship, but now they have to deal with an outcome of a judgment from the judiciary that is inconvenient to their policy goals. And so, in a way, I think this provides a very interesting test of the Moon administration's commitment to the principles of judicial independence that it has been espousing.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think about the possibility of these former POWs being compensated? Because it's one thing to have a court's ruling, but it's another thing for these POWs to be compensated. And in fact, we've heard the organization that represented these former POWs say they're going to take legal actions to seize North Korean assets under South Koreans' control. So what do you think is a possibility of this?
Well, this raises a very interesting sanctions compliance question, because for a number of years, a gentleman named Im Jung-suk, who is a senior advisor to the Moon administration, has been North Korea's financial agent, funneling the funds for North Korean state media's intellectual property rights back to Pyongyang. Now, that relationship began 1 year before the UN imposed sanctions limiting financial transfers to North Korea. But North Korean state media are almost certainly all under the control of an organization called the Propaganda and Agitation Department. That entity is not only sanctioned by the United Nations, but by the United States and the European Union and most UN member states. So the Moon administration can't simply unblock those funds and allow them to escape to the north without violating UN sanctions. They would, at the very minimum, need the UN's authority to do that, and the US or the EU could block those funds transfers. So that also puts the Moon administration in a very difficult position of having to please the North Koreans by remitting the funds or violating UN sanctions.
Mm-hmm. And in fact, Otto Warmbier's parents, speaking to VOA, said that it welcomes South Korean court's ruling and that it will continue to track down North Korea's assets as well. So how did you see the similarity between this case and Otto Warmbier's parents' case on North Korea?
Well, legally, there's no similarity at all. If you read Judge Howell's decision in the Warmbier case, it relies on strictly American authorities like the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act and the Terrorism Risk Insurance Act. The South Korean courts obviously have no interest in U.S. code authorities. Nonetheless, as a general sort of a policy principle, both cases have in common people who refuse to let North Korea go scot-free after harming the people they love or themselves in the case of the South Korean plaintiffs. I think, well, the accountability to the standards of humanity is what has always been missing in our engagement with North Korea. So on that level, it's something I encourage, and I hope it's something that we'll see more of.
Yeah, I would just add that I'm not sure if this is correct, but I believe that there has also been congressional action that has facilitated the possibility that the Warmbiers might be able to receive compensation from funds, North Korean funds that are frozen in the U.S. system. And so that raises an interesting question of whether or not the National Assembly in South Korea would be willing to take similar measures in support of POW-MIAs in South Korea.
So we'll have to see what kind of future rulings will be made on North Korea and what kind of efforts will be made to seize North Korean assets. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Stanton and Mr. Snyder.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That does it for this week's edition of Washington Talk from Voice of America. Please join us again next week for more analysis. Goodbye.